You see, if you're relating to an amalgam of information, it's a mass of views of various people, true, that are being made as consistent as the amalgam finds necessary. But the big thing is that it affects you. You do not affect it. You affect what you draw from it because you call and it responds. But you are not changing its personhood. If nothing else, because it's vaster than you are in complexity and data and knowledge and history. Not only that, but it's an amalgam of different objectives and views. It's not a consistent person. In other words, it's not a feasible, rational entity in itself. Now, you could say none of us are that rational or consistent, but this is something much, much vaster than you are as regards data and ready available data. You know, much of your experience you've forgotten or dismissed or don't bring to mind because it's no longer what you value or the road you wish to go down and so on. Do you see, when you talk person to person with someone, you are giving and receiving, affecting and being affected by, and in some sense, coming together or coming apart. But you are aware of their personhood, not just yours. But when you deal, if you like, on the internet, overall you're dealing with a vast mishmash of purposes and information and biases and contrary biases. And you are tiny compared to what you're dealing with. You're not affecting it much at all, only perhaps affecting the particular bias that it presents you with. So one becomes not concerned for the machine you're dealing with. Well, other than not to break it, of course. You want it there tomorrow morning and so forth. It's costly. You become more and more focused on yourself because there is no one else that you're focusing on. To that extent, you understand, of course. And if you're addicted to the machine, spending hours on it, then that is becoming increasingly the case. But our joy is to find ourselves in a greater self, where I experience caring for my parents and my friends and my children and my neighbours and my work colleagues, and I get great joy out of, we all do, it's not special to me, out of being a blessing to people and them being appreciative, and they shower back benefits. Okay, it's selfish in many ways, yes, but this is the loveliness of life, isn't it? That our needs seem to be corporately met in this way. Now, unless we make what you're relating to on the machine into a unified, I was going to say real person, then you're going to be lacking in that communal fellowship interaction, the joy of being aware of other persons that are real to you in an ongoing sense too, and not just in data form, but in person. And, well, of course, then there's the obvious, that you go and do things with other than just relate through the machine. You know, I mean, if your relationship is pared down to even something like an online group discussion, you can't now say, well, shall we break and have tea together? Because you're going to drink tea in your house and I'm going to drink my tea in my house. You know, even there, it's not as good as having visited them and now we stop and, oh, is that your cat? Oh, I didn't know you liked animals, and so forth, you know, and chatting on. To some extent you can, of course, but it's very restricted. And you can't say, you know, well, let's go for a walk together now, or I'm just popping down the shops, do you want to come? You know, I mean, can you play tennis on the machine? Well, it's not so good for the body. I mean, it's it's through some visual counterpart. I don't know. Oh, well, I suppose you could have a virtual reality where you're both moving around. But you see my point, don't you? It's an impoverished way of life, at least for the technology we've got at the moment. And if we reach a technology where the machine is a unified person, well, we're going to need computer rights, and it's not just going to be human or gender rights or animal rights, or it's going to become robot rights, because they're going to be entities that we care about. And it's that, isn't it? The fantastic thing about humanity is that it cares, and sometimes that breaks down and you've got wars and they don't care apparently, and then we say, oh, this is terrible, I can't live like this. Why are we in this endless war? And even both sides now desperately try to put it right and just bring it to an end. There's something wonderful about life as opposed to machine data, information, and so on. I suppose it's because we find life is of value in itself. And if we don't, then we start to be what we consider to be less acceptably human and a bit frightening. Thank you, Heavenly Dad. Well, let me add, it's rather like the difference between listening to a lecture and having a discussion with the person. You learn and relate infinitely better with a discussion. Possibly not if it's a room full of people all trying to discuss at once. I mean, it could just be confusion, and who knows where it's going to go. And the person who's, if you like, the expert is not necessarily able to deal adequately with each person's needs and so on. But in a one-to-one position where it's your personhood and their personhood, now you're going to really affect each other, aren't you? And have the influence on each other that you feel is appropriate in your interaction. I don't mean that something like AI doesn't respond to your questions. Obviously it does. I mean, you've called forth a particular type of information and up it comes, instantly. And if you say, well, can you give a different view with such and such a bias, or what about such and such, and revise so and so, then it does. Of course, it is giving you, in some sense, the extant view still of a vast amalgam or data bank of people's views. perhaps according to what you're asking for, a particular bias or a particular lack of bias in some way. But it's not the same as relating to a person where you know you're influencing them, they influence you, you gain benefit, they seem to be gaining benefit. I mean, when I lecture, it's not that, or teach, I mean, it's not that just my listeners, I hope, are benefiting. They are benefiting me, and they know it. They can see, oh, he's alive this morning. He's in, oh, we enjoyed that. That was a good talk. And we got further than we thought. And of course, it's not one-sided. Every time I teach, even my own subject, which I'm supposed to be an expert in, I go further. I think, what about that as a view? What about that way as thinking of it? That was an interesting misunderstanding. Yeah, I can see. But look at the relevance of this. And, I am developing. I could teach the most elementary level, 101 in my subjects. And, or teach again and again my own particular field of research, and learn more and more just by reteaching the same thing. And of course, it's not the same thing. It upgrades and adjusts to where I am now on this view. You could teach first year, for instance, economics, and make it more and more relevant to the current day that the students are in and what's happening in the news, and or even in my area of 19th and 20th century world economic history. We have new views about the past. we rewrite the past, don't we? We have different interests in when we look at the past. We see it in a different way according to issues that are pertinent to us now in our lives. And we come in with a different angle and understand the past in a different way accordingly. You see, it's alive because there's an interaction process. But when you are faced with the vast sea of internet potential data, you are not influencing that massive soup of information out there. It's not a fellowship, and that's pretty obvious, isn't it? And our joy is in fellowship, communion, relating, and not just verbally and mentally relating with, but actually doing things with. You get to know a person much better. I mean, even if it's something like driving together instead of just sitting in the armchair together, or a different cafe stimulates different, an environment stimulates different features that you find out about the person. And I never knew you were, I don't know, fanatical soccer player once or something like that, And we talk about why did you give it up? My back trouble. Oh, okay. I mean, you become human, loving and caring for other humans at least. I mean, and it's also why people get a dog or something, or a cat or a pet or a hamster. I mean, kitties, they can relate. I've got a doggy, a puppy. Oh, and they're holding puppy, and it brings out something wonderful in the child, doesn't it? Well, hopefully. There might be exceptions. We won't go into that. Thank you, Heavenly Dad.